no questions, I think we can start. I'll keep time so the bell will just go off. Yeah, hopefully that's all. Top one, ready to go.
Proposition English is a word where the game is fair and the players accomplish. A better word with less inequality between leagues, players, and teams. Very proud to propose. Few points considered, and then to our two main arguments here on how we're going to have more fairness in the sport, and secondly, how we're going to have more investment in the academies of the players. Before that, how we model this debate? How we see this loyal bonus? First thing that we have to understand is that when we talk about loyal bonus, we're talking about significantly portion of money that are going to be provided by the league to the players when they accomplish these 5 years in the same team. Three main points on that. One, we understand that this bonus will work different in different leagues, but the same in the same leagues. So, for example, Brasileirão will pay a certain quantity of money, and all the teams in Brazilian leagues are going to receive that money. But we can have a different quantity of money being paid, for example, in the Spanish league, in the Mexican league, and there it goes. Secondly, we understand that this money is going to be paid monthly, starting from exactly the moment that this guy reached the 5th year. So, by the moment that this guy gets this 5th year, he will get a bonus in his salary that he's going to receive like every month to the time that he gets out of this team. And three, who we are considering in our side the guys who are accomplished athletes. We have some points on that. We understand that three main metrics are going to define who are accomplished. One, the trainer and the capture are in the team, so they have some kind of ideas of the players that they have, and they have some ideas on understanding the reality of the trainings, the reality of the games, in a quantity that the supporters, the people that are going from outside, they don't see. Secondly, we also are going to have some journalists, and thirdly, we're going to have specialists in this sport. It's also important to mention that we are not talking that accomplished players necessarily the guys who are playing the big teams. Can be, for example, a guy that is playing 14 days in the relegation zone, but is literally playing a lot that is playing in a very high category. Alright, going further. Our first point here in this debate. How are we going to bring more fairness in this sport? First, some sort of framing to this. We have 2 points on this frame. We have to understand that we have a huge dominance by teams with money in this sport. First, leagues that overall they have more money. So we have, for example, Qatar League or, for example, the Premier League that are substantially going to have more money, considering, for example, others like the Mexican League. And two, we are going to have disparity between the teams inside the league, due to investments or they come, for example, from outside, or even from the quantity of supporters that they have or the administration that they have. So we're going to have these 2 kinds of disparities. So why is it a problem? We have 2 reasons for that. One, it becomes cyclical because when a league is bad, the supporters of the league, the markets of the league, the viewing of this league is going to be worse then. So due to that, the league tends to get even worse, and also the strong league is going to have more viewers, it's going to have more sport, it's going to have more sponsors, and due to that, these leagues get stronger. So you have a cyclical situation where you're going to have something strong that gets stronger, and something that is bad and going to get even better. Secondly, we understand that we have a pressure on players to always get out of their countries, because you always have the desire of playing in the best team that can give you the best salary. Because we're talking about a profession, so this guy literally needs that money, for example, to have a good life and to enjoy everything that he wants. And thirdly, we understand this is also very bad for the supporters for 2 reasons. One, leagues are going to get getting bad because the players that they have, for example, that are good, that start in their leagues, they just decide to get out, for example. And two, players are going to have a less appeal with their own clubs because now they are, for example, reviewed by their academy and now they are going to get out. Now, for example, Vinicius Junior in their side, the guy who starts, for example, in a team in Brazil and just decides to go abroad. This is exactly how we understand that. That's very good and that's very bad for the supporters, for the quality of the league that lose these players and in the loyalty that they're going to lose when seeing that player growing and play at all with them. But how do we solve that? We create a stronger incentive for athletes to stay in their own clubs. Okay, why do we understand that? We have two reasons for that. One, we are going to generate what is non-existent before, the money, because now the team that didn't have the money before, the team that could not afford the money before, now can afford the quantity of money to keep this guy inside the league and to keep this guy inside the team, because now we are going to have the league paying some money for that. Two, you are going to have stronger leagues, you are going to have a less leverage to get these new players, because now when you get, for example, someone in a weaker league, you have that kind of incentive to be playing for this weaker league because you know that you can get money, you know that you can get the money that the other league would pay to you before. And three, we also understand that it's true, even having bonuses in strong leagues. Why? Because it's much more difficult to get, for example, 5 years playing in La Liga. Much more difficult to get 5 years playing in Premier League. So what is the point? This guy say, I'm going to risk my bonus and play like 1 or 2 years in a league in Europe and probably like get this 2-year loss, or I'm going to a weaker league, for example, like a Mexican league, and get this bonus safe and earn a quantity of money. This is the main point to understand here. And how do we impact that? Supporters at all are going to enjoy a better league. So when you have a better league, as I explained this cyclical problem that we have, we're going to have a bigger market. Because now supporters they enjoy more watching this sport, they enjoy more watching that league, and this becomes a more appealing market for investments, and overall you get a better quality. Before going to our second argument to make investments in academies at the level.
If the Brazilian league is poorer than Qatar and has a smaller bonus than Qatar's counter offer, players will switch anyway, so you can't solve inter-league disparity.
I already explained you that. The point is, when you go, for example, for leagues that are substantially better than yours, you're going to have much more difficult to play this kind of league. So what is the point? If you get, for example, to play to Real Madrid, it's much more difficult to stay at Real Madrid for 5 years than to stay at Corinthians for 5 years. So you have an incentive to get the bonus that are going to be safe for you and have a stable career, then go into Real Madrid risking it all. Second point, investing in academies more. Well, we understand that. As I explained to you, teams are going to have a less leverage now on buying these players. So what is the implication of that? We're going to have less transfers in these markets of sports happen. So as you now are going to have less ways to get your team better by transfer, what are you going to have? You need the academy. You need the players that come from your own club since they are young to make it strong. So what is the point from here? You have a clear incentive on the teams on investing more on their own academy to provide a better team, as now it's more difficult for you to buy new players. So what is the impact on that? First, you are creating opportunities for those who before wouldn't have this opportunity. And secondly, in a more specific way, you are getting players from different areas. You are getting players from areas that were not going to be attended before. Why? Because now, Real Madrid is going to have a bigger incentive to go to an area, for example, in Africa, or to go to an area in South America, that they would never seek for a youth player or something like that. Because now they have a clear incentive of searching a good player, of searching a new hidden gem, because now they can not only use their money overall to get the best player. So what is the point on that? You are going to have a bigger expansion on the sport, and are going to provide even more opportunity for these players overall, not only in the certain areas that you had, for example, before, and not only in the certain situations that you had before on these buying players, and now you can access a much larger market, accessing people that wouldn't have the opportunity of becoming players and wouldn't have the opportunity to appear in this media and to appear in the eyes of these huge clubs. Due to that, very proud to propose.
Okay, we invite the first opposition speaker. Yeah.
Loyalty bonuses are traps that imprisons the soul of players within the confines of a team that they truly do not desire. It engineers a recipe that spells the death of what sports truly could encapsulate, because we are the side that defends the spirits of the sport we're very proud to oppose. Two arguments in his speech. The first on how this hurts the potential of players, and the second on how this damages the competitiveness of leagues. Before that, onto a counter that should undercut the vast majority of Team Brazil's case in 3 ways. The first, what odd proposition support it is round. No, we would note that this loyalty bonus on their side will very likely going to be incredibly significant. These looks like lump sums that leagues will likely fork out for players. The reason for this is because that amount will be significant enough to change the calculus of players on their side to act otherwise. For example, the English Premier League paying billions to their players. The second, this means on their side, most individuals would stay in the same team regardless of their conditions, regardless if that team truly benefits their fullest potential. For example, Carlos Sainz was a second-class driver that was not costed any light in Ferrari in the F1 league, but it still stayed with the same team anyways. We would note that more of these individuals would have been engineered under the side of proposition for that monetary concern. The reason for this is twofold. The first is that this is perceived to be the safest option to get the greatest amount of monetary gain on their side in the short term. Note, there are exponential risks, for example, in a perception that you will potentially get worse if you move to another team. You need to adapt to chemistry, that you need to, for example, work with a set of different people. You might have different managers and different coaches that you might not like. Or, for example, that a team purely does not suit you. But the second is that it entrenches the narrative of toxic loyalty under Team Brazil, where managers and teams cannot use this to justify and retain their players. This increases the coercion on their side. Second part then, what does opposition support? Two things here. First of all, we support existing mechanisms of teams internally rewarding their players meritoriously. So for example, bonuses for good performances are common in teams like Man City and football. Or for example, McLaren, that to the drivers in F1 Wilsons could still exist on our side to reward these people meritoriously. But the second is purely things like achievement awards, like sponsorships, the endorsements can help your team symmetrically exist on our side. The second is your other incentives for people to stay with their teams if they want to. For example, if you came from a communal sports team, you play for example, a small team in football in the States, you will very likely be attached to their community. This communal spirit on either side of the house does not change. The implication of this, which leads to the third part under this setup, is that the players who wanted to stay in their existing teams would have stayed anyways. This is around, therefore, but those who would have otherwise preferred to jump ship, would have taken the risk to embark on an entirely different journey, would have had greater potential breakthroughs, would not err on a side of caution that would be stopped on their side of the house. On to a few points of rebuttal now. The first argument is on the dominance of leagues and due to the existence of inter-league disparity. Two responses to this. The first is that I think this is a self-defeating argument even in first proposition's words, because it's unclear why the Saudi league will have significantly more money than the English Premier League, for example, to poach players. These are inherent problems because the Saudi league is backed by billionaires in countries like Qatar and the UAE that does not change, which is why the dominance is symmetrical, and this ought not be a deciding metric in its realm. But the second is a flip this argument because it is beneficial for good players in the likes of Ronaldo, in the likes of Mbappe and Neymar to be able to switch to these leagues because they get exponentially more benefit. We would rather stand on the side of players that is not existing problem that proposition could not solve. So that is our argument out of the round. On to a first argument then, in terms of how this hurts the potential of players. There are a few sections underneath this. The thesis of this argument is that proposition engineers a cycle of toxic loyalty that hurts the potential for players to expend on themselves. This happens in a few ways. The first is on the players of themselves, that they stay because of the money, and they stay because of the money and the security guarantee that is the most lucrative and profitable in the short term. This damages them in two ways, regardless of their actions. The first is that you hurt their ability to play well, because notably, there are inherent problems that you cannot change. For example, like insofar you stay in the same team, regardless of how hard you try. So, for example, you might be the second best goalkeeper in a team, but because it was someone better than you would never be able to play and you will be benched forever. For example, you might be better at center or right, but you're a fourth-place striker because your team did not have a striker in that point in time. Those are situations that people likely landed on their side. But a second is that this creates, therefore, a cycle of demotivating incentives on their side of the house. That you end up not training as hard because it piles up over time, where the frustration becomes more imminent and it cannot be ignored as a result. And it damages your spirit and your passion for the sport to begin with. But the second is that we think team incentives also change on their side of the house. So, for example, by amping up the rhetoric to make you stay, and notably, most clubs are profit incentivized and short-termist. It means that if they retain a player for as long as possible to rip out the most amount of benefit from that player, they would. I think that is exacerbated on their side of the house. The comparative on our side of the house is notably that if you jump leagues, so even if it's not a team that is incredibly bad for you, or for example a team that is incredibly horrendous, we would note that defending players jumping across different teams for lesser than 5 years is still monumental for the development. It is, for example, figuring out granting you more flexibility, what types of positions you are best in. For example, what types of teammates you would prefer, what chemistry would suit you the best. Those things to experiment around, those things are lost under their side of the house. The impact of this claim is immense, so thank you, because it hurts potential breakthroughs. Think about the Lopez Leblanc, one of the most famous runners in the world, that could break his personal record every single time he runs. Think about the football striker who could strike a goal in an incredibly razor-thin, in a split second, in matches with razor-thin margins. Those are the people that we could have engineered a potential. This is what sports innately is about, to break the limitations of what is existingly available. Before we move on to the second argument, I'm going to
I think you forgot the word accomplished in the motion. If you are not an accomplished player within your team, you are not going to receive any bonus loyalty.
So yeah, this debate is mainly about the players who are accomplished. We say that there's a spectrum of different players that are accomplished. Not all players will be rewarded with the same contracts, and that similar lucrative contracts on that. We would note that the mid-tier players inside these established players could be significantly benefited on our side of the house, but also this is a responsible argument. Second argument then on how this proposition hurts the competitiveness of sports. The thesis of this is that poaching as a strategy is less likely to happen on proposition due to the lack of capacity. There are two reasons for this. The first is, not only do you have to outcompete for rivalry contracts right now, for example, be to poach a player, you would also have to take into account the loyalty bonuses that they might have. And as what P1 concedes, that this is likely an amount that is incredibly immense and cumulatively adds up over time. This means that even if we concede that perhaps for large clubs this benefit is symmetrical, but there are huge impacts that trickle down to medium-sized clubs or medium-sized teams across different leagues, across the board. These are underdogs that could have poached a single player and would have had significantly better performance. This looks like, for example, that when Carlos Sainz moved to Williams, which is another team aside from Ferrari, that it significantly enhanced Williams' performance. Those are the types of stories that we can narrate on our side of the house. The comparative on our side is twofold. The first is you could team optimize significantly better because you can get a defense player, you get a striker if your team did not have it. But even if we have to defend in the worst of cases, where big teams have a monopoly over sports on our side of the house, we would know that is good because that is what increases the competitive of the overall sports that is not available on their side of the house. We're culture wins.
Do you think that's people for that speech? Second prompt for this one. Yeah.
panel, team oppositions trades the possibility of maybe having a better potential of a smaller amount of players for a bigger amount of for you to be able to actually give more opportunity to another bigger amount of players. I'd like to start rebutting their first argument. The first thing that I'd like to rebut in this argument of potential is that I don't really understand what they mean by potential. Because I think that there isn't like so much of like a bigger difference of like on like the trainings or the things that actually happens. Normally like the big teams actually hires you, but the amount of training that you're actually able to get that also depends on yourself as a whole. So I don't really get exactly what is this type of potential we're talking about. But the second thing that I'd like to talk is that note that the amount of people who leave those smaller leagues, who leave those weaker leagues, is smaller than the amount of people who stays in those leagues. So here we're talking about you may be giving more possibility of a potential to those people, but in our side, what we're actually able to do is that we increase the competitivity in these weaker leagues as a whole. So what we're doing inside of those leagues is that now smaller clubs inside of those weaker leagues are now also more capable of being more competitive. This means that they also have more resources. They also are able to give more possibilities of potential and of achieving potential inside of those smaller leagues. I prefer way more giving more chance, more potential, and more resources to this bigger amount of players who stay inside of those weaker leagues rather than prioritizing those few people who are leaving to other types of league. This is the type of impact we're talking about. But even taking them at the best case, even if that's actually true, that we hinder the potential of some players. Note that our second argument was about how we're actually also able to get more people from more places. What does this mean? That at the point that you have this type of bonus, what changes is that in order for a club to get good, in order for a club to get the best players, it isn't about necessarily you having the capability of paying the higher salaries. It's not only that clubs need to invest in paying higher salaries. We change this to clubs needing to be able to form good athletes. So clubs now also prioritize forming good athletes over necessarily only capturing good athletes from other clubs. So you're changing the type of incentives of how those clubs work. What does this mean? That I would like to extend the impact that our first speaker brought. This means that at the point that clubs put more resources, put more time, and more energy on actually being able to form better players, what you do is that inside of countries such as Brazil that are enormous, or even countries who are small, you're able to get to more people. Because now you focus on getting on different regions from that specific country. Note how that can be extremely relevant in South American countries, for example, when you talk about football. Because a lot of those football players, they come from poorer backgrounds. They come from backgrounds that aren't as favored. They are not able to necessarily pay to extremely high expensive schools of football. At the point that the clubs are more invested on actually getting good players and improving them, you can also give more chance to those type of players. This is what we are saying. They are also giving more opportunity to the poorer children, to the children who have never been actually discovered or actually trained in their side of the house. And note that not only the intensity of this is bigger, because we're literally talking about maybe someone who will continue poor forever, or who would actually never actually become a football player, to trading this for the potential of someone who is already a professional football player. Maybe we have one player that, yes, is gonna stay inside of Brazil instead of going to La Liga, but at least in our side, we're able to actually transform someone into a football professional player. So I think that our impact inside of this is bigger. The second thing that I would like to engage with their side is about how you're imprisoning those football players inside of their own clubs. Note that this already happens in their side of the house. But the thing is, who imprisons that specific football player isn't the club who discovered them, isn't their first club. Who imprisons is the other club, is the club on the other side that have way more money and wants to hire that specific player. Because at the point that you're playing at a weaker league, or at a weaker team, and a bigger team offers you an extreme amount of money, you're not able to even compare, because the choice is way too different. like the options that you have have like a way bigger disparity. This is the actual imprisonment that you're doing. What we're actually doing in our side of the house is giving more choice to those players, because now they have two choices that they can actually compare, who are and who doesn't have as much as a big disparity. We're literally implementing one of like the main foundation mechanisms of like the economics marketing, of you having more choices. At the point that you have more choices, not only are you able to have more choices, but you also have bigger incentives to be able to make those choices better. So I think that in this stage you also win. Yes, etc.
So which side has more choice? Is it your side that forces people to stay within the same team or a same club for countless years? Or is it on our side of the house, players are with the autonomy to evaluate whether they ought to stay in that team or not?
No, that we're necessarily forcing. It still has a choice. If that specific player thinks he wants to, like for a shorter period of time, maybe gain more money instead of getting the bonuses, he can compare this. He can still do this specific thing. The thing is that it's only on your side that you're only giving one option, and that's exactly why we make this disparity of the choice smaller. So I think that actually the autonomy of those players are actually bigger at our side, where the choices they have are better. But now going to our arguments, something I like to make it better. So why those specific players have less incentives to have more incentives to stay in the same club? Because know that the prime, like the years that you spend in your prime, are very short. What does this mean? That a player cannot stay at his best condition for like more than 3 years, for 5 years, 6 years. Normally, when we talk about the lifespan of a player, we're talking about 10 years, maybe 15 years as a whole. So those players have their prime in 2, 3 years. At the point that they have the choice of going to like a bigger club, they know that they probably are not going to actually be able to spend 5 years in that specific club. And even if they're actually able to spend 5 years in that specific club, what they know is that they're not going to be extremely accomplished in it. Because it's way easier for you to be an accomplished player on those weaker leagues on a weaker team, rather than the stronger league, stronger team. So they have they're able to make this decision, and they have this bigger incentive of actually staying in their own clubs. Why is this so important, and why we think that this is the main thing inside of this debate? Because at the point that we're able to make a whole league better, more competitive, we're also giving not only more like a better emotional attachment and a better things to the players who are now also be able to actually compete, because now you go into like a football player, go into the league knowing that you have a chance of being the champion, and honestly that you're not going to be the champion, because the champion is going to be like maybe the 3 biggest clubs. You know that you also have the chance, but also to the immense of people who actually watch all of those sports, who want to watch their local league because they want to go to their local stadium to watch those people play. We are also giving to these people more happiness, and to the people who care so much about those sports, who love those sports so much, the ability of actually being able to see something competitive, something that they know that their team also has a chance of winning, and it's not only 3 big teams. And this is why I'm so proud to propose.
Do you think that speaker for that speech? Second opposition speaker, 3 minutes.
players into security. They cage out their potential and they cap what you can achieve. They don't want to test the limits of human ability. They want to keep you into what you think is safe. 3 things in my speech. Firstly, on leagues. Secondly, on players. And lastly, an extension on fans. I want to first note that our second argument on leagues had absolutely no response. And this is damning for this side of proposition. Because the reality is that if we can maintain the competitiveness within leagues, we can have fans watching those leagues to begin with, we are able to access every single one of the benefits that they want to claim. If they are claiming that leagues have disparity, we say it is only visibility that gives people sponsorship. If they say that players don't get enough opportunities, it is only visibility from the competitive edge of playing in a good team. the league itself wasn't competitive, if the games itself weren't compelling, I'm unsure as to why this sport is going to be sustainable to begin with. Because the reality is, the people that fund the sport is the people who are entertained, the people who want to watch it happen. So if you want to argue for equity, if you want to argue for people arguing from the ground up, you needed to explain to me why the league was going to remain competitive, would remain fair. But secondly, I want to point out that fairness for smaller leagues was never going to be the winning clash in this debate against competitiveness, for two reasons, right? Number one is that I'm unsure as to why they have more fairness on the side of proposition. Their first argument argues for inter-league competitiveness, and they wanted you to make it fairer. But they just said that the Mexican league is poorer than the Qatari league. They just said in setup that bonuses are going to be different across leagues. Insofar as the Qatari league is always going to pay me more than what the Mexican league can provide me in terms of bonuses, I'm unsure as how they cross that, they fill that gap, and they get people to stay within leagues in the first place. But secondly, is that if they want to tell you that it is harder for people to move across leagues, which is why they're going to stay within leagues to begin with, number one, why does that change anyway? If it is harder and a player knows that they cannot survive in a different league, we don't think that this argument, this rebuttal is going to be exclusive. But two, is that if it is harder to stay within leagues and people want to take a risk, we say it's fine. If they decide and players decide that they want to take the risk on the side of opposition, even if it is harder to survive, that is when they get to test their potential, and that is when they become better players. But lastly, on leagues, the non-response to leagues also means, panel, that we have a winning edge out in this debate. Because even if players are worse off, even if some grassroots players never get the chance to be on the big screen, at the very least, sports remains fun to watch, and the league remains competitive, and we have the best games possible. When you watch the Clash of Titans, and when you are able to enjoy the sport, that is when opposition edges up. Secondly then, on players, I want to point out here then that the rebuttal from proposition is non-negation. Because their rebuttal is that this debate is only about accomplished players in the POI. Yes, they have some accomplishments, but the whole point is that there is no limit to human potential. You may have accomplished some things in a small pond. You may be the big fish in the small pond, but we want you to become bigger. It was only on the side of opposition that you allow people to accomplish more. And proposition concedes this in their setup because they say they also want the big fish players to stay in their small ponds and remain big fish there. It is only on opposition when you have to change and they are forced to improve in a different league. But secondly, P2 asks us, what is the difference when you change leagues? Because they say that truly it is up to the players themselves. Panel, gut check this. You don't think having a better training center, where you're able to run more, where you're able to test the limits of your potential more, is going to make you better? You don't think going to a different team with better players who challenge you in every single training, who push you to your best and push you to the limits of your potential, doesn't make you a better player? It is only when you change leagues and you get out of your comfort zone, meet different kinds of players, meet different kinds of people within training, and meet different kinds of coaches, that you are able to not only expand and diversify the skill sets that you have, but to improve on your current existing one, because you are only tested when you go into a different environment. But the second response then is to their second argument on how they say clubs are forced to invest and form better players from the ground up. I want to first question that this is not an exclusive benefit. If you have talent, raw talent is going to be raw talent. Raw potential is raw potential. You would still want to train players with that raw talent who you can see one day succeeding, for example, Neymar when it comes to being a striker, superseding, for example, Hamilton when it comes to being a racer in the F1 league. The whole point here then is that the only reason people poach on the side of opposition and proposition is when there is a gap within the team that they cannot currently fill with the players that they have from the ground up. So I'm unsure as to why this is an exclusive benefit that is limited to proposition. But secondly, is that I'm willing to trade this off. Even if we get less players, because you don't push the ones who don't have exceedingly amounts of raw talent and raw potential, at the end of the day, it is about poaching and benefiting the players that already have the capacity to improve, that already had the foot in the door and already had skin in the game. These players deserve better, and when they concede in their first argument, the security and the inability to take a risk confines them to their potential, you limit the ability for players to grow and to become better. This is the winning argument in this debate, because insofar as players stay limited within their potential and they don't perform at their best capacity, you are unable to have a competitive league, even within their small leagues. So this takes out the entirety of their case, because their argument was that big players should stay in small small leagues so that they become more competitive. We say it is because they stay in small leagues and they refuse to improve that none of this changes and they stay stagnant on the side of proposition. But sure, I'll take a POI.
The best players are clearly a minority of clubs inside of those leagues as well. So you're only like playing against the best in a minority of times. Like in a great majority of times, your other comparisons are also worse.
I want to first point out, if you're arguing about inter-league competitiveness and people move to, for example, the English Premier League, then yes, the majority of football matches within the English Premier League are going to be far more competitive and people are going to enjoy it far more. But secondly, was that it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the winning angle of this clash was not that the leagues become more competitive themselves. It was that players had the potential to grow, and that was the utmost priority because that came analytically prior to whatever argument they had. It doesn't matter if the players stay within the leagues if they stay stagnant and don't improve. Third argument on fans, and here's where I want to deal with the preamble. Because even if fans are loyal to certain teams, we think that they're going to stay in support of these teams and we benefit them regardless. For two reasons. One, if you benefit the fans who stay loyal to certain fans. For example, if I am a Messi fan and I'm super loyal to him, I want to see him improve and see him grow, see him break the record, see him score more goals than anybody has ever done that we thought was humanly not possible. This means that we benefit fans for players. But secondly, if it's about benefiting fans for teams, then it is only on the side of opposition that we're able to benefit those fans because they had the ability to push when there were skill gaps. When there are skill gaps on the side of proposition, they don't do anything because they don't have the ability to train players immediately to fill in those gaps. They can't fill in those gaps and they can't make teams better. But secondly, was that the other part of this argument is that we draw in new fans via the increasing competitiveness within the sport. So sure, even if it is confined to the top 1% of matches, where it's about Chelsea versus Manchester City, we think this is still inherently a benefit because we allow for the clash of titans when we allow for the creation of titans to begin with. The best teams with the best players competing becomes far more entertaining. And even if the attention is negative, for example, when the speculation on who is going to move to which team, that in itself still increases discussion. That's why F1 became more popular within the past few years because there was so much coaching, because there was so much mobility. The way here is simple, that fans are the prerequisite to everything, to visibility, to sponsorship, and to better treatment, and the existence of the sport overall.
We take that speaker for that speech. Invite the tab of speaker.
I think the first thing that I want to talk about is about comparative league. We bring an argument to you about how we have better players that are going to stay in smaller leagues and actually improve the quality of that league and give more attention to the fans and things like that. And what are their answers for that? They say that if bigger leagues, they still have more money than the smaller leagues, we still have like a lot of incentives to go to the other leagues. Okay, two main things on that. First, we believe that professional athletes, they don't have like as long careers. They have, for example, 10 to 15 years careers. And what does short careers mean? It means that every time that you change a club, you restart that kind of counting that you're actually being able to receive that loyalty bonus. So you believe that, yes, this is something that influences your decision. But second, you stay at least like in the maximum like 5 years in your prime. So I believe that it's very important to know that it's much more prone to you if you're acting, for example, in the Brazilian league, in your team there, you're going to be able to play in a high level and be an accomplished player for more time than the time that you can be a very high level accomplished player in Real Madrid. So I believe that players still know that it's very difficult to them to receive the kind of loyalty bonus if they go to a very bigger league in their side of house. So I believe, yes, you have a counterbalance that makes you decide, in a lot of instances, to stay in your club. But is this a dispute? What they try to claim? No, of course not. We have a lot of nuance in this debate. Not every good player are going to stay in the Brazilian league. I believe that, yes, a lot of stars, they may want to go to Real Madrid because their salary may even outweigh the amount of bonus that they will receive in Brazil. I believe that, yes, a lot of players will go like transfer to other leagues, but there are a lot of good players that are not going to transfer and are going to value that kind of bonus that they are more prone to receiving their initial leagues, and that's why we have a possibility of more players staying in that club. And in a macro perspective, what it means that you have less transfer in the sports market at all. I believe that that's something very important to compare with this debate. But what is the main argument that they try to bring? They try to bring an argument about how this actually decreases the potential of players because they are like cages in their clubs. First, I believe that yes, they are free, so this is something that I just can't understand. But much more than that, about the potential. Their argument is totally contingent on players actually perceiving that they will receive the loyalty bonus after the time that they spend in that club. But there's where their call is false, because you need to be an accomplished player, and they don't think that, they don't talk about that in any part of their speeches. And why is that relevant? Because if you are the second keeper of the team, as they try to bring in the PM, as you are someone that is discouraged training because you don't want to be there, if you are someone that you are not like doing very well in the field, you are not an accomplished player. So you're not going to perceive that you're going to receive that kind of money. And they say, oh, but there's nuance. Maybe some players are going to think that. No, we bring a model to you to explain how these accomplished players are defined, and the committee that decides who are these accomplished players. We have journalists, we have specialists, we have the captain and the coach of each team that is judging these kind of players. If you are not an accomplished player by that committee, you don't have this kind of perceive that you are going to stay in the same club. So now there's where you're going to flip their argument. Their argument only exists if you're going to actually increase your potential by going to a smaller team. Because that's what they say. You may go to another team because in this other team you can like be better, or you can do more things, or you can like outweigh your performance in your last team. It's only true when you go to a smaller team. We believe that if you're a very good player and accomplished, it wouldn't happen. But if you're there talking about you go to other team that is worse, so you can reach more your potential. I believe that it happens much more in our side of the house. Why? Because players don't go to smaller teams in their side of the house because they have less salaries there. And you don't have any kind of loyalty bonus that you're giving you the incentive to, even if you are in a smaller team, if you perform better, you're going to receive more money. So it only happens in our side of the house when you actually know that if you go to a smaller team, you can have a good performance and you can receive the loyalty bonus from the league. So that's incentive to actually reinforce the bad teams in the league. It only happens in our side of the house because in theirs, you will always be in the team that is paying better for you because you don't have this payment incentive that we have in our side of the house. So I just believe that it engages completely also with their second argument about competition. Why? Because if only in our side of the house we have these players actually being prone to go to smaller teams and reinforce these smaller teams, we are able to actually increase the competition in the sport. And it directly engages with our point, with their point about potential in competition. Yes, we have more competition. Why? Because a lot of good players, they are staying there, they are remaining in their initial league because they want this profit after their 5 years, but also the players that are not performing very well, they go to smaller teams because they want to receive that bonus after these 5 years. So we are reinforcing the smaller teams and the smaller leagues only in our side of the house, and that's why you increase competition, so you increase visibility and you increase the performance of these smaller leagues. And they don't engage with that within the debate. But much more than that, they say, oh, but if you go to a bigger team and you're actually going to reach more potential because you have like better facilities and things like that, I just believe that this also is in our side of the house. Why? Because they don't engage with our second argument at all. Our second argument is how we're going to invest the money that otherwise in their side of the house we are going to invest only in buying new players. We explained how you have less leverage, as in a macro perspective you have less transfers. So what makes you invest more in your academy? It means you also have better facilities even in the smaller teams. You also have better facilities even in the bigger teams. Why? Because the teams are investing more in developing the players that are within their squad because they don't have the capability of having a lot of different players and hiring a lot of different players in the market. Why? Because you have incentive to the players to remain in the team. So I believe that even the facilities is better in our side of the house. But also, they didn't answer our second argument, and I want to point out how important it is. I'm talking about players that would never have a career because there is not a capture system that countries actually includes invest in that kind of thing, that now they're investing more in our side of the house. So I'm talking not about like a player that already receives a lot of money and is going to another club that will receive even more money. I'm talking about a kid that would never have the opportunity to be a professional athlete, and in our side of the house, they would have this opportunity. Why? Because you're investing more in the academia, you're invest more in the capitation of players, because now you don't have the ability to have more players in the market, but you have the capability of developing better players, and that's why this investment is way more important than layers. Before going deep on weighing, I want to talk about
If you don't let big teams dominate, you don't attract new fans to give them more visibility and more sponsorships. This was never an incentive issue. We pointed out you had no capacity to begin with.
Sport is not about you are attracting more fans, but you are keeping your fans active and you're actually wanting them to watch the game. I was never addicted to football because I started to like football in Brazil, but I was born in a family that everyone's like football, so I want my league to be good, I want my team to be good, I want to support my family sport, and I want to be more in the league. If I have better players in my league, because now they're not going to England, or they're not going to Qatar, or to Saudi Arabia, because in their leagues they're going to receive more money, I believe that I'm enjoying even more my league. Why? Because I believe that we have better players, we have better quality, we have better visibility, and that's what happens in our side of the house and not in theirs. But in weighing, I just believe that even if they prove they are going to have potential, it matters way less than anything that we have in our side of the house. Because first, potential is something that you can't measure. How you can measure the potential that a player that could have? I just believe that even if it was true, I don't believe that it's as significant. Why? Because even if I train, I go to a better club, I have facilities, I will probably never be Messi. Because you can't reach a potential that is way better in a team that you were before. I believe that the potential isn't something that actually increases that much in this debate. And even if it increases, it weighs way later than the point of our second argument about the forming more players. Because in scale, you are forming much more players that wouldn't have the opportunity. Second, in the intensity, you are giving opportunity to players that would never have, while their side of house to improve already players. And thirdly, in the vulnerability, we actually have much more vulnerable people that are becoming athletes in our side of the house. So proud to refuse.
We think that's enough of that speech. Invite the third opposition speaker.
Team Brazil tell you that they're the ones winning on smaller players. Because we were the side that told you how we expand your potential. We were the ones that told you from first. We are the ones giving smaller players the choices to want to go into other places. They're the ones that castrate their improvement by putting them within their loyalty teams, by coercing them with loyalty bonuses. It's on their side of the house where you manufacture the choice to want to stay, and that's why people on their side of the house have no ability to untap what they really wanted. I have one clarification at the top of this speech before moving on to two issues. First on human potential, and secondly on inter-team mobility and league improvement. Firstly, though, on the clarification, I want to call out that their second argument on investment cannot be a collapse or a deciding issue within this round. Two reasons why. Firstly, this was largely unmechanized. I'm unsure why loyalty bonuses that was the wording of the motion was a tipping point to more investment. At best, you prove that people get more money through the loyalty bonus, but that does not directly translate to more external sponsorship or external endorsement or the ability to expand past that. I think at best the extra bonus that they get on their side is contingent on your ability to improve that potential later on. Which leads me to my second response. If their second argument on investment was contingent on your ability to get bonus and you get that bonus to improve yourself, that was contingent on that smaller team having the capacity to want to increase your potential. We told you throughout all of our responses on growth that you cannot get that. So it is actually not true that we didn't respond. Our case directly was in contention with your second argument of investment. We tell you that you cannot get potential. So even if you have some money for it and the incentive for it through the money that you get, I think that on your side of the house, when you stay within your own smaller team, the potential was never won. That was unleashed, and that was why on your side of the house, the possibility for growth cannot be why your second argument wins your round, even after we give you all the responses. No. Two issues then. Firstly, on pushing human potential, and secondly, on inter-team mobility. Firstly, on pushing human potential, there are two questions I will answer within this issue. Firstly, what is the extent of improvements under either side? Brazil attempts to co-opt our case immediately in P2 by saying that we can stay in small leagues and therefore improve them. There are three responses under this. A, this was largely asserted. I'm unsure why was that true. In fact, Daphne tells you multiple counter characterizations that tell you why likely small teams and smaller leagues fundamentally cannot get you improvement because they were
impoverished and are like restrained by capital and restrained by their lack of platform. No response by their speakers. B, I think we have to analyze who are these players and why they really wanted to leave their initial league first. I think these are athletes who realize they can no longer improve if they stay. And that's exactly why you cannot unlock improvement on their side. These are exactly players who, despite the team dynamic that you have throughout 5 years, wanted to jump ship and wants to go into another league, wants to go to another team. These are players who know the direct circumstances and know they cannot get improvement. So that means team dynamic doesn't work. Their coaching style is fundamentally incompatible. They know that there's barely any capital left in their own team. So the athletes themselves know that improvement is not viable. So who then is Brazil to forego that choice and subject them to more delusion and false hope to assume that you can stay in small leagues and continue to improve? I think the athletes themselves, the choice and the reason why this debate occurred, assumes that there was no improvement possible. That is why you cannot get that. But also C, assuming that you do get some improvements, we concede. Because our case was never contingent on inter-team within that small improvement that you get within your own bubble. Our annual improvements was the improvements you get when you step out of that league. Why was it better that you get new players as more exposure? When you get exposed to new rules and different types of avenues, when you get new coaches and your ability to untap that potential was valid, and that was our case from the start. So if we concede their very best case, they still have it. But the degree of improvement, aside from Malaysia, because Malaysia tells you why the improvement was far greater. So if they tell you that improvement was a winning issue in this debate, we are the ones that get it. This is especially important as well because it deals with their fundamental point on the young sports player. We tell you it was especially about this young sports player who wanted to step out of that league, who wanted to unleash their potential. Brazil casts their improvements on their side of the house by keeping them within their small leagues that they want to get out of. That is why on their side of the house they cannot pull off this. Secondly, who then are we focused on improving? Brazil talks you an ancillary response by telling you that we actually should not improve big teams or big players because there is a large benefit to improving smaller teams. Firstly, I think A, it's contingent on your capacity to improve small teams. My first section mitigates this largely, and this needs to be noted. Their own option cannot work. But also secondly, let's just lay this on the head front. The pace of improvement is largely faster with established teams and our side of the house as opposed to mid teams and mid players on theirs. This is just empirically true because we have more capital, better coaches, and more sponsors under our people on our side of the house. So we are the ones that actually are able to unleash and reach more records far easier, and this is more certain on our side. So if Team Brazil concedes that improvement is beneficial, not only for their smaller team players, I think it was on our side of the house that gets it better. So at best, you improve your small leagues. That was still speculative given the amount of responses coming from our side of the house. All Brazil has at this point in the round is a hope and a dream, and that is not enough to outweigh our substantive analysis since first. Before I move to the second issue though, I'll ask you why.
The money for investment in scouting junior players doesn't come from the motion, but the fact that we invest less in hiring new players as they have less incentives to train.
Okay, sure. I think at best you have less money and resources are still zero-sum on your side. The resources are used less on your side of the house, but that does not explain why investors would flock to your team necessarily. I think external benefits of wanting to go into your team is still largely unproven. We tell you that investors are more likely to be persuaded by potential, and if this debate was really about investments and improvement, it was Team Malaysia that got it first. On the second issue then, on inter-team mobility and how it improved leagues. In this question, I will answer, how is it likely that players will move up to big leagues? Their only response throughout the entirety of their speeches was that actually you won't jump because there's a short-term career path that you are likely to prioritize, and therefore that itself is the reason as to why you're going to stay within smaller leagues, and that itself is a benefit on your side. I think firstly this is a tension, right? Because the entirety of the case is contingent on people jumping into smaller leagues and moving to smaller leagues to begin with. People want to stay within smaller leagues even though we have big leagues to back them up. I'm unsure as to why that was untrue on their side of the house. But also secondly, I think just based on the basis of intuition, it's likely that people do want to move up to big leagues given all the potential for growth we told you in first. That's exactly why inter-team mobility is able to improve this. The reason as to why this fact is extremely important, and there's also a separate winning pathway for human potential, is because it does not touch on just the athletes themselves, but on the large competitiveness of the league. So we extend far beyond what Team Brazil can even conceptualize in their own case. At best, they talk about the individual players. We tell you the moment in which we have coaching, we have counter bids, we have more avenues in which inter-team mobility can exist. That's exactly on our side of the house, where we have more people jumping ship, and that is when people are able to improve themselves by ensuring that other players are able to improve. They're able to improve themselves in new leagues, but also in general increase the competitive of the sport because they get to choose for themselves what is best for them. They get to choose the leagues they're able to thrive the best in. That's exactly when the league itself improves. On the last issue then, on fans. This is a new argument comes from Daphne's speech that had zero rebuttal whatsoever from their side of the house. So let me extrapolate something to assume they really was dynamic. They tell you that fans will still want to stay on their side of the house because fans do care about smaller teams. For example, teams that care about their own home country. I think Daphne tells you from her speech that there are essentially two types of fans that are within the sports industry. The fans who care about the players and are beholden to them, and fans who also care and love about the team. We are the ones that benefit both of these on our side of the house because we're the ones giving players the avenue to improve. So those types of fans are actually absorbed on our side. But also secondly, when teams improve in general via our growth mechanism, that's when fans stay. So as a whole, competitiveness means more viewership and more fans stay, but also in general, people are able to improve themselves, and for all the reasons more, so proud to go first.
We did not speak for that speaking by the opposition describes.
I want to talk about three things in this reply. The first is on the potential of players, which gets in more. Second is on the competitiveness of leagues. And finally is on fandom culture. First then, on the potential of players. I want to note that it's the most important clash in this round for two reasons. The first is, Prague helps us impact this clash forward from the start. Because they say that sports careers are often short, so if it is short, then the most important thing is to maximize the potential of players within that confined period of time. But the second is that this is the clearest impact to what both sides want to achieve in this round. The sentiment in this round is that which side benefits the sports leagues to the greatest extent. We will note that the potential of players, i.e. having the best of players existing, is the best way and the most direct way in benefiting the overall expansion of sports and the sports league in and of itself. So if we prove this, we're in this round already. There are a few things underneath this. I want to observe that Team Brazil, towards the end of their case, pretty much concede that players on their side, regardless if they're new or old, would stay in the same team for an extended period of time. Given that, we explain this is problematic for a variety of reasons. The first is, this purely restricts your potential as a person. So as a young talent on their side of the house, you probably need to figure out your position problem inside football. You probably need to figure out your chemistry. Could you have better chemistry? Or for example, experimenting and jumping around different teams purely allow you new windows of opportunity and new grasp of what you think you could do better. They say, well, this choice exists anyways, but this is unresponsive to the mechanism which they just concede in the same breath, which is that most people would choose not to jump around on their side, and that is the culture they destroy. This means on that they get less potential for players for purely staying in the same team for a significant amount of time. And even if those players decided to leave at the very end, they've already passed their golden age, which meant they still restricted the ability for players to play in their best position. This is debate because we told you from first that sports is about being able to break the limitations of what human capacity is. It is about that record, it is about that razor thin margin in a single round. It is about the time splits in the F1 racing cars that make it significantly more excitement. So winning this already wins us the round. Second clash, therefore, in terms of the competitiveness of sports. I want to note that their only argument in this round was that apparently, well, you invest less in buying players, and therefore, as a result, you have more money to invest in yourself. The first is, we want to highlight that it's probably the same for the teams in the small leagues they characterize, because if these leagues are small anyways, presumably there's less money to self-fund and to improve on things like capacity building. But the second is, we have questions in second and third. Why was this exclusive on their side of the house? Presumably, you could still invest in yourself on our side of the house after buying new players. You don't just buy new players and leave them there. But the third is, we pointed out to no response, the resources are only zero-sum on their side of the house, because if you poach more good players, you give more lifeline to sports, and that is why you expand investor confidence. So their claim was already taken out. Our claim in this clash is, poaching is incredibly bad for competitiveness. Coaching is incredibly beneficial for competitiveness for two reasons. The first is, for mid-sized teams, this means that if you buy over a second-tier player, or potentially a star player, that exponentially increases your chances in a competition. For example, we told the example of Williams, which is a team in F1 that did exponentially better after they invested being able to buy a player. Their competing mechanism here was that while competitiveness is likely symmetric, because you could still, for example, expand smaller leagues on their side of the house. The breaker is this: competitiveness at best is limited on their side of the house because they only expand small leagues individually, but it's only in our side of the house where you concentrate every single good player in one league that everyone watches, that you're able to make the sports overall more competitive. But the second is, we also explain in the worst of cases, even if it's a monopoly of teams, or a monopoly of a few teams inside that sport, that is still incredibly beneficial because that is where you present the clash of titans, the clash of the best teams again. Finally, on facts, I want to note that the comparison applies here as well, just that they at best benefit fans in individual countries, i.e., the small leagues that they uplift, but it's only in our side of the house where those players are concentrated in one big league and everyone gets the benefit.
Do you think that's enough for that speech? About the position of the players? Yeah.
Firstly, on the clash of potential. We told you there's two ways a team can get better. If it hires better players or other players. Secondly, if it develops its own players. What we told you is that in our side of the house, those teams are hiring less people, or at least are paying less to those players, to like the players they're trying to hire. Because the thing is that the metric changed. At the point that players are changing less from team to team, those teams are also hiring less. So this means that for your club to get better, you're not focusing on hiring or offering bigger amounts of money, because that's also less convincing. You're focusing more on developing the players that you already have. How does those players look like? We're not necessarily talking about the players who are already playing at the league. We're talking about clubs who have big and lots of different layers of different teams. We're talking about the base of that club. We're talking about scouting new people, about people of that specific club who go to schools, who go to regional schools all over the country to see kids who are good and who are bad. And then a kid with 14 years old is able to train in PSG, the Discovery Academy. These are the types of people that we're doing. They told you that this amount of money that we have in our side of the house isn't as big. I have one picture to paint to you. PSG paid $300 million to Neymar every single year only to hire him. At the point, even if you get only 10% of that, 30 million. Imagine how much you can do with 30 million in scouting, in trying to get better other players in as a whole. We're talking about a lot of money into you actually developing way more people. Instead of having $300 million in Neymar or even $30 million in one specific player that maybe it's gonna achieve its full potential, as they say, we're able to invest this money in lots of people because the team wants to develop lots of their own players in order to see who is the best. This is the type of thing that we're talking about, and this is why we're able to discover and develop way more potential. But know that the metric of potential is also different on both of the sides. They want specific players to develop the full of their potential. Maybe, yes, even if that's true, in their case, we're actually getting Neymar, Messi, and Ronaldo Gaúcho to their best potential. Those three players got to their best potential. But this was at the cost of leagues of all over the world. We are talking about leagues in Brazil who are now less competitive because they have less players. We're talking about leagues in France who are now also less competitive, who their fans care less about them. So here what we're doing is that we believe in our side we have a greater communal benefit in our side of the house, rather than maybe three people achieving a specific full capacity that they really do want in their side of the house. So why does greater communal benefit matter so much? Firstly, because of the amount of people that we are talking about. Secondly, because of the vulnerability. People who never become football players or players in their side become in our side of the house. But thirdly, because we're also talking about the fans. Why the fans import so much in this debate. Because we're talking about like the kid who goes with its own father to the stadium in order to watch its own club. At the point that those clubs are not competitive anymore, or those leagues are not competitive anymore, though that kid doesn't have that much entertainment, doesn't have that much happiness in actually accompanying their own team, doesn't have that interest of like going that much to those stadiums. So here we are talking about that yes, in our side, we're actually able to get more visibility to those smaller leagues as well, because at the point that the fans who already exist are also more engaged, are also going more to the stadium, are also buying more t-shirts of their own club, are also buying more tickets to their friends and convincing other friends to also go to that club. What we do is that we also make the visibility of those leagues also better, and that's what I'm so proud to